The year is 38 AD, Caligula. Rome's mad young emperor still struts the Palatine. Blood hasn't dried from his latest execution. And into this world, lurid, trembling, thrilling Messalina is born cradled in lineage that could both elevate and destroy her. She is a descendant of Mark Antony and Octavia's sister to Augustus. Her veins pulse with the inheritance of conquest, betrayal, and seduction. Her face, statuesque and serene, will one day decorate public monuments and later scandal sheets whispered in the Subura slums. But at this moment, she is merely a daughter of privilege, shielded yet watched. In Rome, aristocratic daughters are political currency. Marriage is less about companionship than strategy. And Messalina, beautiful cunning, untrained in cruelty, but quick to learn, is soon placed into the hands of the last man anyone believes will become emperor, Claudius. Limping, stammering, an afterthought of a man dismissed by Caligula as a court jester. Messalina is pushed into his arms as part of a quiet arrangement, two branches of the imperial tree woven tighter. She's 15, he's over 40. But Claudius, for all his awkwardness, is still dangerous in ways no one fully grasps yet. In public, the union looks absurd. A young rose beside an aging scholar. But in private, it creates something volatile. Messalina is now placed on the threshold of Rome's darkest corridors, where power is less about birth than about boldness. She watches. She learns. The court of Caligula is a carnival of cruelty, where enemies become ashes overnight. From this theatre of fear, Messalina absorbs her first great truth. Survival favors those who smile while sharpening their knives. She is pregnant quickly. By 39 AD, she bears Octavia. A year later, she gives birth to Britannicus, a boy with imperial blood. Claudius improbably becomes emperor after Caligula's assassination in 41 AD. And overnight, Messalina, still barely 20, wakes as the Empress of Rome, the most powerful woman in the world. Her ascent is unprecedented. No political training, no consular bloodline, only the unpredictable favor of a man many still mock. But Messalina is no longer a silent wife. With eyes like polished obsidian and a voice trained to purr like diplomacy, she begins to move. At first, her actions appear benign, a patron of the arts, a tender mother, a loyal consort. But beneath the silken exterior, something coils a hunger, not just for influence, but for control. Rome, still in shock from Caligula's reign, doesn't yet see what is blooming behind the palace curtains. There are feasts, of course, pageants, decrees issued in Claudius's name that seem too convenient to serve only the emperor's aims. Slaves whisper that the empress visits the chambers of men uninvited. A senator's fortune vanishes after denying her a villa. Rivals fall ill with suspicious timing. And through it all, Messalina's smile remains intact, radiant, inscrutable, like a statue with secrets. Historians will later argue over how much is true. Was she truly as depraved as Tacitus paints her? Or was her legend, like so many women in history, twisted by the pens of men who feared female power in silken scent? One fact, however, is clear. Messalina does not stay in the shadows. She walks beside Claudius in triumphs. She appears in Senate-adjacent ceremonies. She begins granting favors, punishing rivals, elevating lovers. The guards who once snickered behind their hands now salute with real unease. And all the while, beneath the polished marble and perfumed robes, Rome begins to tremble, not because of its emperor, but because of his wife. She was born into blood, not the blood of common soil, but the kind that glitters under moonlight, that drips from daggers hidden in palatial sleeves. Valeria Messalina's lineage is as steeped in danger as it is in destiny. She is the great-grandniece of Augustus, Rome's first emperor, and the great-granddaughter of Mark Antony and Octavia. Her bloodline is both revered and reviled, powerful enough to be watched, dangerous enough to be eliminated. From her earliest breath, Messalina is raised in a household where whispers hold more weight than laws. In the sprawling gardens of her family's estate, she learns to walk on marble floors, slick with history, learns to smile with calculation, learns to listen always to the silence after someone's name is spoken. She is no child of innocence. She is a child of proximity to the throne, and the throne at this time is a perilous place. The Julio-Claudian dynasty is a coiled serpent. Fathers turn on sons, mothers poison rivals, siblings disappear behind closed doors. Caligula rules with madness, executing on whim, sleeping with sisters, proclaiming himself a god. It is in this feverish climate of suspicion and spectacle that Messalina reaches adolescence, a rose blooming in a garden choked by thorns. Some say her mother Domitia Lepida, a woman of striking ambition and sharp edges, groomed her daughter for high marriage. Others believe Messalina was always independent, calculating, unafraid, almost eerily composed for a girl so young. What remains indisputable is that her marriage to Claudius is not forged in love, but in alliance. Claudius, despite his limp and stutter, is a member of the imperial family. An uncle to Caligula, he's been kept far from the reins of power, thought too odd, too broken to matter. But Rome has a strange taste for the unexpected. When Caligula is assassinated by his own guards in 41 AD, it is Claudius they discover hiding behind a curtain trembling, and it is Claudius they raise to the purple. Suddenly, the girl married off to a laughingstock becomes empress. Messalina's rise is a quiet coup. No war, no public vote, just the tilt of fate and the silence of daggers in the dark. She is now wife to the emperor-mother, to his heir, and perhaps most dangerously, young. Her youth becomes both an asset and a weapon. In a court of aging politicians and scheming generals, her beauty draws eyes, but her mind, that remains masked, coiled behind coy expressions and lowered lashes. Rome is not a city kind to women with ambitions. Officially, Messalina is expected to fulfill the role of imperial matron. Bear children represent virtue, remains silent in statecraft. Unofficially, she begins to test the borders of her power. Her family connections are vast, her knowledge of court dynamics growing sharper. She rewards allies with land, arranges marriages to secure loyalty, and starts to intervene in judicial matters, always in Claudius's name, always with the soft voice of a concerned wife. But the mask slips in subtle ways. A rival is accused of treason, based on evidence delivered by one of Messalina's freedmen. A former lover of her mother is exiled after denying her a favor. A wealthy widow loses her estate to the crown. Rumors swirl that Messalina herself demanded it. These actions are not direct, not traceable, but they form a pattern, a map of influence drawn in the shadows. And while Claudius buries himself in paperwork and policy, Messalina begins cultivating a garden of power, quite literally. She establishes her own private gardens, a space far from the eyes of the Senate, lush with imported plants and winding pathways. There, in the labyrinth of ivy and marble, she hosts gatherings. Some are innocent poetry recitations, private feasts, games. Others, Rome begins to murmur, are not so innocent. Slaves report late-night visits by young noblemen. Guests arrive in togas and leave in silence, their names never recorded. The gardens become a myth in themselves, a symbol of excess or freedom depending on who tells the story. To some, Messalina is decadent, dangerously indulgent. To others, she is simply enjoying the same liberties men have claimed for centuries. But either way, the legend is forming. A woman barely in her 20s, maneuvering through Rome's deadliest halls with a smile and a scent of jasmine. A woman surrounded by whispers of parties, lovers' manipulation. A woman who, unlike so many before her, is not content to stand behind the throne. Messalina is not yet infamous, but she is no longer invisible. And those who underestimate her, who see only the beauty and not the blade behind her gaze, will come to regret it. Because in Rome, where power is worshipped like a god and betrayal is just another form of diplomacy, Messalina is learning how to play the only game that matters. And she's playing to win. The empire laughs behind Claudius's back. His limp, his stammer, his penchant for dusty scrolls and snail-paced decisions, all ripe for satire in the taverns and whispered jokes in the Senate. Rome has crowned fools before, but never has it enthroned a man so thoroughly dismissed as irrelevant by his own contemporaries. A puppet, many call him, a placeholder, the butt of fate's cruel joke. But Claudius is no simpleton. He survives not by strength, but by invisibility, by learning when to pretend not to see. That survival instinct will serve him well. because beside him now sits a wife who is neither silent nor invisible. Messalina, newly empress, quickly learns the value of image. In public, she radiates the ideals of Roman womanhood, modesty, fecundity, loyalty. She appears at temples in a veil, sacrifices for the gods with downcast eyes, and praises her husband with rehearsed affection. To the people, she is Octavia reborn. To the Senate, she is a symbol of the restored domestic virtues that Claudius claims to cherish. But behind closed doors, the mask slips. Messalina is not content with appearances. She wants control, influence. And she begins to take it not through edicts or speeches, but through manipulation. With Claudius distracted by his endless need for order, she cultivates power through backchannels, freedmen, advisors, judges, anyone who can be reached with a favor, a promise, or a threat. One of her earliest tools is her ability to make people disappear. Wealthy rivals lose their lands on legal technicalities. Widows find their inheritance seized by the state. A Roman knight who once mocked her mother is accused of impiety and stripped of rank. Messalina's fingerprints are nowhere to be found, but the pattern is unmistakable. Those who cross her suffer, those who flatter her rise. Even senators begin to seek her favor, couching their ambitions in flattery and flinching smiles. It is not just politics she manipulates, it is perception. She elevates her family, appoints allies, even has coins minted, bearing her likeness, a rare and audacious move for a living empress. She arranges marriages for distant relatives, linking herself to powerful clans. She oversees the construction of public buildings under her name. Each act a quiet conquest, a step deeper into the machinery of Rome's power. And then there's Claudius. He is not blind, not entirely, but he is willfully unaware. Some historians argue he trusted her. Others claim he feared her. Still, others believe he used her, letting her act in his stead, so that his hands remained clean. Whatever the truth, one fact remains: Messalina operates with near-total impunity, until the rumors begin to change shape. At first, they are whispers of Messalina's charm, her appetite, her indulgence in luxury. Then they begin to darken. Names are attached: young senators seen leaving her garden feasts too late, former slaves given offices far above their station, soldiers who speak too freely of private encounters. Whispers grow into accusations. That she seduces for favors, that she manipulates trials, that she visits brothels in disguise. One rumor claims she hosts midnight orgies in the palace baths, cloaked in incense and secrecy. Another, more outlandish but persistent, says she enters the city's most infamous brothel under a false name, competing with other prostitutes, not for money, but for dominance. The historian Juvenal will later mock her as the Empress of Lust, the woman who could not be satisfied. Scandalous, certainly. True, that remains debated. Some scholars argue these tales were political smears born from misogyny and a desire to demonize a powerful woman. Others believe at least some of the rumors held truth, pointing to the culture of Roman elites, where sexual freedom for men was celebrated but condemned in women. And still others suggest something darker, that Messalina's pursuits were not driven by desire at all, but by power. That each lover, each seduction, was a maneuver, a way to hold secrets over senators, to bind soldiers with shame, to turn her body into a weapon no blade could match. Whatever the case, one reality persists: Messalina is no longer just a name. She is a legend in the making, a figure of awe, fear, lust, and loathing. And Claudius, the man she stands beside in ceremonies and dinners, seems either oblivious or unwilling to confront the storm that now circles his palace. After all, to confront her would mean admitting he has lost control. To confront her would mean risking everything. So he smiles, he nods, and Messalina keeps rising. The palace gardens bloom with more than roses. They are vast, perfumed, and labyrinthine, designed not just for beauty, but for discretion. Here, amid fountains shaped like nymphs and marble benches worn smooth by plotting bodies, Messalina hosts her private empire. These gardens are her sanctuary, her theatre, her web. To outsiders, they are a symbol of elegance, a testament to the empress's refined taste. But to those within Rome's whispering class, they are something else entirely: the beating heart of scandal. Messalina, now in her early 20s, has turned these gardens into a playground of influence and desire. The banquets she holds there are cloaked in refinement, Musicians pluck lyres, exotic birds sing in gilded cages, wine flows from crystal cups. But beneath the veil of civility lies something much more primal. She selects her guests with precision. Ambitious young senators, disillusioned generals, heirs of noble families all find their way into her gilded trap. Some are drawn by admiration, others by fear, a few by lust, but none walk away unchanged. Some of them, it is said, return again and again. Messalina does not just seduce men. She studies them. She knows which ones crave attention, which fear disgrace, which hide secrets in their family vaults. Her seductions are not reckless, they are weapons. Each conquest gives her leverage. Each tryst offers her a thread in Rome's tapestry of power, and still the whispers grow darker. The gossip spills beyond the palace and infects the streets. That the Empress has an insatiable hunger, that she has lovers delivered to her chambers like wine, that she tracks conquests like a general tracking battles. And then comes the most damning tale of all. It begins in the Subura, the dense, smoky quarter of Rome, known for its brothels and back-alley deals. Here among the boards and street performers, the story spreads like wildfire, that the Empress of Rome disguises herself as a common prostitute, slips out at night and sells herself for pleasure and prestige. Some say she uses a false name. Others claim she flaunts her identity, daring men to recognize her. One version of the tale even suggests she competes with the other women, boasting of taking the most clients in a single night. Juvenal, in his bitter satires, will later mock her, the royal whore who tires the men by night, then heads to court by morning, veiled in white. Is it true? Historians remain divided. Some point to the poetic exaggeration, common in Roman moralizing elite men, projecting their fear of female power onto tales of sexual chaos. Others believe there may be a grain of truth buried in the dirt. After all, Messalina was surrounded by enemies eager to bring her down, and such a story, if untrue, would have been too dangerous to invent while she still breathed. Still others ask, why would an empress debase herself so? The answer perhaps is not lust, but control. The brothel, unlike the palace, is a place where she commands absolute power, where she chooses who enters, who touches, who pleads. In a world where men own everything, armies, laws, names, perhaps the brothel becomes her stage to invert the game. To rule not with titles, but with desire. And yet as the stories multiply, something begins to shift. Messalina is no longer just feared. She is mocked, resented. Her image, once carved in stone and celebrated in ceremonies, becomes the butt of dirty jokes in bathhouses. Roman wives whisper to their daughters, warning them not to speak her name. But she is not yet dethroned. In the eyes of Claudius, or at least his court, she remains unchallenged. Perhaps he refuses to believe. Perhaps he knows and doesn't care. Perhaps as some suspect he is simply biding his time. Because in Rome nothing lasts forever. Not pleasure, not favor, not even an empress's impunity. For now, Messalina walks her gardens like a goddess. Her hair coiled in gold, her feet gliding across mosaics of Venus and Mars. Men still bow. Women still curtsy. The world, it seems, remains hers. But in the shadows of those same gardens, envy and resentment coil like snakes. And one day soon, they will bite. The Empress builds her kingdom with favors, secrets, and smiles sharper than daggers. By now, Messalina is not merely the consort of Claudius. She is a force of nature within the imperial system. Though young, her mastery over the court's invisible levers of power is terrifying in its precision. Rome bows not just to the emperor, but to his wife, whose approval or disfavor can lift a man to consulship or banish him into silence. She does not govern from a throne. She rules from behind silk curtains, from whispered conversations in the atrium, from a glance exchanged across a banquet table. And no one dares confront her directly, not even Claudius. By some accounts, the emperor remains willfully blind to her growing dominion. Others claim he is simply overwhelmed, an older man, bookish and cautious, whose frailty renders him unable to rein in the wild storm he married. Messalina, it seems, thrives in that silence, but her ambition begins to stretch far beyond bedroom games and garden intrigues. She now manipulates Senate appointments, land grants, and legal outcomes. A merchant who offers her a bribe is gifted a monopoly. A rival who offends her finds his estate seized. She champions causes she has no interest in simply to raise allies. She befriends freedmen and palace servants, anyone whose loyalty can be purchased. One of her most notorious moves involves a man named Gaius Silius. Handsome, rich, well-connected Silius is everything a Roman patrician aspires to be. But under Messalina's gaze, he becomes something else, a pawn, a risk, a potential king. The affair between them begins in secret, as many of hers do. But soon it becomes something else entirely. Bolder, more dangerous. Messalina flaunts their relationship so openly that even the most timid courtiers begin to whisper. And then shockingly, she takes a step no Roman empress has ever dared. She marries him. Yes, while still legally wed to the emperor. The wedding, by most accounts, is not a hushed, shameful act. It is celebrated with fanfare, in broad daylight, with witnesses, with guests. Some sources claim she even wears imperial jewelry, that a feast follows, that wine is poured and toasts are made to Rome's new first couple. How could this happen? Some say Messalina truly believed Claudius would never return from his journey outside Rome, that she could seize power in his absence and rule with Silius at her side. Others argue she had grown so drunk on her own invincibility that she thought herself untouchable, that her pleasure had turned into a delusion. The truth may be more complex. Some historians propose that Messalina and Silius were plotting a coup, one that would remove Claudius entirely, that their union was not about love, but legacy, that Silius, once married to the empress, could be declared guardian of her children, and thus next in line to rule. It's a theory that chills the blood, because if true, it means Messalina was no longer playing politics. She was playing empire. Rome, however, has little patience for women who reach too far. As word of the marriage reaches Claudius, then traveling in Ostia, the palace erupts in panic. The freedman Narcissus, one of the emperor's closest confidants, rushes to inform him before the Senate or the Praetorian Guard can be swayed. Narcissus does not mince words. Messalina has married another man, in your name, in your home, while you still breathe. Claudius, stunned, barely reacts. Some say he drops the scroll in his hand. Others claim he mutters only, "Is this true?" It is more than true. Messalina, once the unseen ruler of the palace, has overreached. Her hunger, once admired, now looks grotesque. The line between ambition and madness has blurred, and Rome has noticed. And yet, there is still a moment where she might escape. Still a second when a whispered apology, a calculated retreat could preserve her life. But Messalina does not flee. She does not beg. Not yet. Instead, she remains in the palace, surrounded by allies, many of whom now tremble in her presence. Silius, despite his bravery, senses the air shifting. The very walls of Rome, once her playground, are now closing in. The empire she built is cracking, and soon it will collapse with the sound of marching feet and an order signed not in love, but in fear. As news of the scandal spreads, it moves like a sickness, seeping into every corridor of the palace, whispered across market stalls, shouted in taverns, and scribbled in the margins of political scrolls. The empress has betrayed the emperor, not just with a man, not just in private, but in open defiance of the imperial order. A mock wedding, a public challenge to the throne. Messalina's fall from grace is not slow, it is a lightning strike. Claudius, so often mocked as weak or indecisive, now becomes terrifyingly efficient. For the first time in their marriage, he acts without consulting her, without summoning her, without giving her the chance to explain. He orders the arrest of Silius, and in a brutal stroke that surprises even his own inner circle, he orders immediate execution without trial. Silius is dragged through the forum in daylight, his toga torn, blood splattered on marble columns older than memory. The man once seen as Rome's golden boy is now paraded as a traitor. His pleas for mercy are drowned out by the cries of spectators hungry for spectacle. His body is dumped in the Tiber. Messalina's other alleged co-conspirators, senators, courtiers, freedmen, are swept up in a tidal wave of retribution. Some are tortured. Others choose to die by their own hands. Their names vanish from public records. Their homes are seized, their families ruined. But it is Messalina herself who remains elusive. She flees the palace before Claudius returns. Barefoot, it is said, dressed in mourning black, accompanied by her mother Lepida and a single servant. No guards, no chariot, no jewels, just fear. She hides in the gardens of Lucullus, once the scene of her decadent parties. The irony is brutal. The same hedges that shielded her from the eyes of the court now shelter her from its wrath. For days she sends desperate messages to Claudius. Not love letters, but strategic appeals. She offers explanations. She blames manipulation. She invokes their children. She insists she still loves him. That she never meant to seize power. That the wedding was a farce, a mistake, a madness. And for a moment it almost works. Claudius hesitates. His mind, historians suggest, is torn. This is the woman who bore him 2 children. The woman he once trusted with imperial secrets. The woman who had held his hand during Senate ceremonies and whispered advice between banquets. To kill her would be to kill part of his own myth. His freedmen, however, are less sentimental. Narcissus, fearing Claudius may pardon her, takes matters into his own hands. Without waiting for a formal decree, he sends a centurion to the gardens of Lucullus with a simple order: kill the empress. But when the soldier arrives, he hesitates, perhaps struck by her beauty, or her pleas, or her mother's weeping. Whatever the reason, he cannot bring himself to draw the blade, and so, in a final act of agency, Messalina seizes the soldier's sword and attempts to take her own life. But she fails. It is the centurion who finishes the job, swift, silent, Roman. Messalina dies not in a marble hall, not in the arms of a lover or the gaze of a crowd, but in a quiet garden with dirt beneath her fingernails and a scream lodged in her throat. She is 23 years old. The aftermath is surgical. Claudius orders her statues removed, her name scratched from inscriptions, her titles revoked, her image banned from coins. The children she bore him are protected, but never speak her name again in public. Rome, with its short memory and long appetite for myth, replaces her within days, but the whispers remain. Because no matter how many records Claudius burns, the scandal is too large to die. Poets mock her. Historians vilify her. Senators quote her downfall as a lesson in female ambition. Over the centuries, she becomes legend, a symbol of excessive lust, of what happens when a woman dares too much. But some voices, quieter, more skeptical, begin to ask, was it truly madness, or was it strategy? Was she reckless, or simply cornered? Did she betray Rome, or did Rome betray her? The answers depend on who is telling the story, because Messalina, even in death, remains elusive. A shadow carved in marble, a ghost draped in purple, a name spoken through clenched teeth and trembling pens. And Rome has never stopped looking over its shoulder, wondering what might have happened if she had lived. Messalina is dead, but her shadow lingers like a perfume in the imperial corridors, sickly sweet, unforgettable. Yet within days the machinery of erasure grinds into motion. This is not mourning. This is purging. Claudius, ever the puppet and now fully the master, begins the work of dismantling the myth of his late wife. It is not enough that she is gone. Her memory must be sanitized, rewritten, condemned. Statues are the first to fall. The marble likenesses of Messalina, those carefully carved to capture her youthful bloom. The slight turn of her lips, the gaze that once captivated a court, are ripped from fountains and gardens, thrown to the ground and smashed. One by one, the symbols of her power are turned to rubble. Coins bearing her image are recalled, melted, reforged. Her name, once etched beside Claudius's in public decrees, is struck out by chisels, leaving ghostly scars across the stone. Public inscriptions show blank spaces where she once existed, as if silence could undo scandal. But even as her memory is targeted for annihilation, the city gorges on the gossip she left behind. Every servant who ever touched her robe, every senator who had shared a whisper with her, becomes a storyteller. The tales grow more lurid by the day. They speak of orgies, of poisoned rivals, of midnight ceremonies in secret chambers. Some of these stories are documented by Tacitus and Suetonius, historians known more for drama than detachment. They describe Messalina not just as promiscuous, but as insatiable, monstrous, ungovernable, a nymphomaniac who threatened the very structure of the Roman world. They tell of her nightly contests with prostitutes in brothels, of lovers lined up like supplicants at a temple, of palace guards bribed into silence, and of slaves who disappeared for seeing too much. But here lies the complication: no official court records confirm any of these tales. No signed accusations, no legal testimony. Just anecdotes, whispers, rumors fed by fear. And yet over time, those whispers harden into history. This is where Messalina becomes more than a woman. She becomes a warning. In Roman political rhetoric, she is invoked as the embodiment of dangerous female sexuality, proof of what happens when a woman breaks free of her prescribed role. In law, she becomes justification for the tight control over imperial women in the generations that follow. Even in death, she is used to keep others in line. It is telling that Claudius marries again so quickly, barely months after her execution. His new wife is Agrippina, the younger niece to the emperor and mother of Nero. She is cold where Messalina was warm, calculated where Messalina was impulsive. She is not chosen for love, but for control. Agrippina ensures her place by manipulating her way into co-rule, marking the end of the chaotic femininity that defined Messalina's reign. But even Agrippina, with all her ruthlessness, cannot erase Messalina completely. The people remember, artists remember, writers remember. And over centuries, as Rome's empire falls and rises in different forms, Messalina's story keeps surfacing, sometimes as tragedy, sometimes as titillation, sometimes as prophecy. In Renaissance paintings, she is draped in gold and framed by sin. In Enlightenment satires, she is a caricature of feminine appetite. In modern feminist retellings, she is a scapegoat, punished not for her crimes, but for her daring. Some historians argue that her so-called brothel visits were invented after her death, part of a smear campaign to make her death politically palatable. Others suggest she was the victim of Narcissus's power, grab a freedman with everything to lose if she maintained influence over the emperor. There is even the haunting possibility that the wedding to Silius, the final straw, was not part of a coup, but a desperate gambit by a woman who knew she was already doomed. What would drive a Roman empress to risk everything? Was it arrogance? Was it lust? Or was it simply the knowledge that in Rome, power never sleeps, and if you are not playing the game, you are already being played? Messalina's mother, Lepida, once tried to save her at the last moment, pleading with her to die with dignity. But even that image of a daughter, sobbing in her mother's arms, cannot soften the public record. The empire is not interested in her pain. It is interested in her punishment. And so, like a myth spun backwards, Messalina is turned from flesh to fable, from a breathing, complicated human being into a fixed moral lesson, carved into the collective Roman psyche. A woman too beautiful, too hungry, too clever for the cage they built her. By now, the tale of Messalina has detached from history and begun to levitate, floating in the realm of mythology, halfway between fact and fantasy. But as her name drifts through time, one label clings to it with venomous persistence: nymphomaniac. It is not a Roman word, not truly. The term will not be coined until centuries later. But the idea of a woman consumed by insatiable lust, driven by her own flesh into destruction, is seeded here in the smoking ruins of Messalina's life. And once planted, it grows like a weed in the collective imagination. Ancient historians revel in the metaphor. Tacitus calls her slavish to pleasure. Juvenal, with bile in his ink, invents a poetic image of her sneaking out of the palace at night, barefoot, hair tousled, to work in the brothels of the Subura. She tired the men before she tired herself, he sneers, and left with her pay like a common girl. But who benefits from painting Messalina this way? Rome, as ever, needs symbols more than it needs truth. And in Messalina, it finds a potent warning. This is what happens when a woman's sexuality escapes the control of the state. When she dares to want, not just emotionally, but physically, politically, publicly. In a city obsessed with appearances, female desire is dangerous. It cannot be seen to rule the ruler. It cannot be allowed to outshine the emperor's own authority. So Messalina's story is weaponized. She is not the first. Cleopatra faced similar slander, her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony rewritten as seductions, her statecraft reduced to pillow talk. But Messalina's sin in Roman eyes is worse. She is not a foreign queen. She is Roman, noble, married, and yet she chooses to burn the temple from within. That is unforgivable. And so she becomes the archetype, the licentious empress, the poison in the imperial bed, the woman who ruins men. In every future depiction, from Renaissance drama to Hollywood film, Messalina is introduced not as a political figure, but as a seductress. Her intelligence is buried beneath corsets and heavy eyelids. Even when portrayed sympathetically, the lens rarely shifts. Her ambition becomes eroticism. Her death becomes punishment not for rebellion, but for being too much, too sexual, too bold, too alive. Some historians push back, pointing out that many of the stories about Messalina surface after her death, when the Julio-Claudian dynasty is already crumbling and scapegoats are in high demand. The idea that she staged a wedding while Claudius was away, openly marrying Gaius Silius in front of witnesses, feels almost theatrical in its implausibility. If true, it would be political suicide. Unless that was the point. Unless it was staged not by her, but against her. A trap. One version suggests that the entire scandal was engineered by Narcissus Claudius's freedman, a man who knew that his influence depended on keeping Claudius isolated from powerful women. By presenting Messalina as not just unfaithful, but treasonous, he ensured her elimination and protected his own position. And so the question remains, was she a libertine or a victim? Perhaps the most chilling realization is that these two labels are not mutually exclusive. She may have been both fully in command of her own desires and a target of political destruction. A woman who played with fire in a city built on kindling. And maybe that's why she still haunts us. Because buried beneath the accusations, beneath the pearl necklaces and whispered betrayals is a real woman. One who grew up surrounded by power, who learned early to use her beauty as currency, who watched men rise and fall by appetite alone and dared to imagine that she could do the same. Maybe Messalina believed she was untouchable, or maybe, like so many women in history, she simply hoped that being unforgettable would be enough. But Rome does not remember with kindness. It remembers with knives. And Messalina mythologized, vilified, eroticized bleeds across the centuries as the empire's favorite cautionary tale. The end comes not in a courtroom, not before a senate, but in a garden. It is autumn 48 CE. Rome is breathing uneasily. The emperor has returned. The story of the empress's betrayal of her secret marriage to Gaius Silius spreads like oil on marble. Fast, slick, irresistible. Narcissus Claudius's trusted freedman wastes no time. He is the one who allegedly uncovers the marriage plot, the one who rushes to meet Claudius with scrolls in hand and fear in his voice. "She has betrayed you," he whispers. "She calls another man husband. She plans to take your throne. Whether this is truth, exaggeration, or fabrication is a question history has never resolved." Claudius, a man of caution and contradiction, hesitates. His heart breaks. But his position is delicate. His rule, though stable for now, still carries the scent of accident, of contingency. He cannot afford mockery. He cannot be the husband of Rome's laughingstock. So Narcissus makes the decision for him. Messalina is taken to the gardens of Lucullus, once the most luxurious pleasure grounds in the city, now a quiet retreat, repurposed for disgrace. It is an irony too perfect to ignore. The woman accused of excess and indulgence will die amid Rome's most decadent flowers. She is 28 years old. Accounts differ on what happens next, as they so often do in stories where powerful women fall. Some say she is given a chance, offered a dagger, told to take her own life with dignity. But she trembles, she weeps, she begs for her mother. Her hands shake so violently she cannot lift the blade. Others insist that she tries, that she brings the knife to her neck but cannot press, that in the end the blow falls not from her hand, but from the hand of a soldier, cold, efficient, anonymous. A single thrust, a broken gasp, silence. The same fate befalls Gaius Silius, cut down in the forum, and with them many others, advisers, confidants, anyone too close to the scandal. It is not just a murder. It is a purge. Some historians believe Claudius was kept deliberately away from the execution, that Narcissus acted to prevent him from changing his mind. Others suggest Claudius gave the order directly, his grief buried beneath imperial necessity. In the aftermath, Claudius does something telling. He forbids all mention of Messalina's name in the court. Her statues are pulled down. Her memory, her memoria, is damnatioed. Rome performs a ritual damnation, but it does not forget her. It never truly wants to, and neither perhaps does Claudius. He will marry again his niece Agrippina in a union that will breed its own tragedies. But those close to the emperor whisper that he often stared into the fire with haunted eyes, mumbling her name. Messalina, the girl he married at 15, the mother of his children, the empress who died in a garden while he sat behind stone walls pretending to rule. Her body, some say, was left exposed for hours naked to the wind lips parted in disbelief. Others claim her mother was allowed to carry her away in secret to bury her quietly beneath the roots of a cypress tree. No one knows which is true, but the garden remains. And in the silence of its hedges a story lingers, not of a monster, not of a saint, but of a woman caught between desire and destiny, punished for refusing to be invisible. The flowers bloom, the empire moves on, but the shadow in the garden never leaves. Rome does not mourn, not openly, not for her. Within days of Messalina's execution, the imperial court begins its quiet sanitization. Her name is struck from public records, her likeness chiseled from statues. Her portraits, those soft alabaster ovals once displayed in temples and courtyards, are shattered beneath the feet of her enemies. It is as if the empress never existed. But power never leaves a vacuum, and Rome, ever pragmatic, begins to prepare for her replacement. A new empress must be chosen, a new face to present to the people, one untainted by scandal, one controllable. Enter Agrippina, the younger niece of Claudius' mother, of young Lucius Domitius, Ahenobarbus, the boy who would become Nero. Her courtship of Claudius is not romantic. It is calculated, political, cold. The Senate is hesitant to approve their union. It is incestuous by Roman standards, but the emperor insists. He is tired, malleable, desperate to restore order. The memory of Messalina, vivid and volatile, has left a crater in his resolve. The marriage is approved. Agrippina becomes Augusta. She reorients the empire's spotlight. The scandal of Messalina becomes a cautionary tale, not of unchecked patriarchy or manipulation by powerful men, but of womanhood gone wrong. She is painted as the extreme hypersexual, unstable, a laughingstock of lust. The satirists have a field day. Juvenal, decades later, will write of her insatiable nights in the brothels of Subura. Tacitus, more restrained but no less damning, will echo tales of betrayal and ambition. Dio Cassius offers contradictions, one moment framing her as devious, the next as tragic. Some historians believe these stories were deliberately exaggerated, crafted not only to discredit Messalina, but to cleanse the reputations of the men who enabled her. The more monstrous she appears, the more justified their vengeance becomes. Others argue that the real woman lies somewhere in between, neither innocent nor depraved, but cornered by the impossible expectations of Rome. She was expected to be silent yet alluring, fertile yet modest, loyal yet politically passive. She was born into a system that rewarded duplicity, yet punished women who mastered it. And in the empire's eyes, her greatest crime was not her desire, it was her ambition. The tragedy deepens when we remember Messalina was not alone. Her story echoes others: Julia the Elder, exiled by her father Augustus for promiscuity; Agrippina the Elder, smeared and imprisoned. Later, even Agrippina the Younger herself would be executed by her son Nero. Rome celebrates its women in marble, but often buries them in silence. Messalina's son Britannicus grows under the shadow of his mother's disgrace. He is young, delicate, and increasingly sidelined by Agrippina, who pushes her own son Nero into favour. Claudius, ever the scholar emperor, watches as his family becomes a chessboard, each move bringing him closer to irrelevance. In 54 CE, Claudius is poisoned. Some say by Agrippina's hand, some say by fate. Nero becomes emperor. Britannicus is dead within a year. The line of Messalina ends in whispers, just as her life did. Yet Rome remembers. It cannot help itself. Even as it damns her name, it repeats it. Messalina, a name now used as a byword for debauchery, a cautionary epithet in Latin grammar books. But beneath that infamy lies the outline of something more disturbing: how easily a woman's identity can be rewritten by those who survive her. What remains of her? A few coins worn and weathered. A bust or two, some say hers, some say not. And words, many words, written almost entirely by men. No letters, no personal reflections, no diary. Just the shape of a woman carved out by her enemies. But history has a long memory. And in the shifting sands of reputation, a question returns. Was she truly monstrous, or did Rome need her to be? Long after the Senate forgets her, the Subura remembers. In the underbelly of Rome, among the spice merchants, prostitutes, fortune-tellers, and thieves, Messalina's name lives on not as a warning, but as myth. Children whisper of her in alleyways where oil lamps swing in the wind. and shadows curl like cats. Mothers curse their daughters with her name. Lovers dare each other to visit the ruins where they say she last drew breath. Some say her ghost walks there still. By night, they claim she returns to the place where her final feast with Silius was held. Eyes hollow, mouth silent, fingers dripping with blood, or perhaps with wine, always watching, always waiting. Not for vengeance, but for a version of herself that history never wrote. It is in these streets, these margins of empire, that Messalina is both feared and pitied. She becomes a cautionary goddess, a Venus gone mad, a Medea without magic. Her image is painted in cheap pigments on tavern walls. Her story survives in oral tales, each version more exaggerated than the last. In one, she dies by her own hand laughing. In another, she curses Claudius with her final breath. The line between woman and legend dissolves. Official Rome tries to erase her, but the plebs never forget scandal. Scandal, after all, is a kind of immortality, messier than marble, but far harder to bury. Some historians find this cultural afterlife revealing. While elite authors like Tacitus and Suetonius reduce Messalina to archetype, the folk imagination insists on her complexity. It adds colour where history uses only shadow. It paints her not only as seductress, but as victim. Not only as fool, but as strategist undone. The Suburra has no patience for sanitized legacies. It remembers the mess, and perhaps in that chaos there is something truer. In 2nd century graffiti discovered near the Calian Hill, a half-erased scrawl reads, Messalina amat. Messalina loves. The rest is lost to time, or to shame, or to silence. Who wrote it? A servant, a lover, herself. We cannot know. But it lingers proof that someone somewhere once remembered her not as an empress or a whore or a ghost, but as a woman who loved. And perhaps that more than all the statues and speeches is what terrified Rome the most. The Senate convenes, the torches are lit, the name Messalina is not spoken. Claudius, emperor of the known world, sits upon his marble seat with eyes fixed not on the future, but on a shadow behind him. Rome expects him to act decisively imperially. And he does. Silius is purged, supporters executed. The name of Messalina is stricken from public monuments, but something in him remains frozen like a hinge that no longer opens fully. He does not weep, he does not rage, he simply erases. But erasure is not healing, it is only survival. Some say Claudius mourned her in private, that he kept a locket with her likeness hidden in his study, that her voice shrill and soft still echoed in the empty chambers of the Palatine. Others say he was relieved finally free from the scandal that tainted his rule, that he considered her death not tragedy but necessity. But the truth lies between these two myths in the heavy silence that followed. Because Messalina left him with more than grief. She left him a legacy to contain. Their children Octavia and Britannicus remain, and with them a stain. To secure their futures, Claudius must reshape the past. Messalina, once Empress of Rome, must become an unperson, an immoral tale, a lesson, not a memory. He orders statues, toppled likenesses defaced, documents destroyed or redacted. In official records, she becomes she who must not be named, a void. And then in a final political pivot, he remarries. Enter Agrippina, the younger niece of Claudius, mother of Nero, calculating, poised, imperial in every bone. Where Messalina was passion, Agrippina is cold steel. With her arrival, Rome's axis tilts. Claudius adopts Nero, ignoring his own son. A new empress rises from the ashes of the last, and with her comes a chilling message: Rome tolerates no ghosts. But Agrippina knows something Claudius does not. She knows that to truly bury a woman, you must own her story. So she ensures that Messalina's tale is told through whispers, gossip theatre. In the very acts meant to erase her, Agrippina finds power. She becomes the guardian of narrative, twisting it in her favour. The harlot queen becomes the cautionary tale, and Agrippina the survivor, the rightful heir to feminine power in Rome. Some historians believe Agrippina exaggerated Messalina's scandals to justify her own ascent. Others argue that Messalina's excesses were real, but exaggerated in the aftermath to make Agrippina seem more virtuous. In either case, Messalina is no longer a person. She is a weapon, a mirror, a ghost. Rome keeps summoning to understand what women can and cannot be, and Claudius' mute limping aging can only watch. He dies poisoned, they say, by the very woman who followed Messalina's steps to power. So history circles back, the emperors fall one by one. But Messalina remains etched not in triumphal arches or laurel crowns, but in the crack of every whisper in every story where love becomes ambition, and ambition becomes a death sentence. Messalina is dead, but her story is only just beginning. In the decades after her execution, a literary campaign takes shape, less a eulogy than an autopsy. Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, Roman chroniclers who wield words like blades. In their accounts, she is not simply immoral, she is unhuman. A nymphomaniac, they claim, addicted to debauchery, shame-proof, insatiable. They write not to remember, but to condemn. She becomes the monster Rome needed. It is no coincidence. These men write under emperors who rose from chaos under Nero Domitian, the Flavians' rulers desperate to legitimize their reigns by casting the past as obscene. Messalina's life is twisted into a morality play, her death a necessity, her sexuality a sickness, and her power an abomination. Some historians now believe much of what we know about Messalina is fabrication propaganda repackaged as history, that the infamous brothel story theatre, that the bigamous marriage to Silius a political trap, that the orgies, naked races, public exhibitions, all written decades after her death when none could dispute them. But the stories stuck, because Rome, like every empire, needed its women to fit certain molds: the virtuous matron, the obedient daughter, the modest empress who supports without overshadowing. Messalina shattered all of that. Whether by her own hand or by invention, she became the spectre of female power uncontained. And for that she was painted not as a warning but a curse. In mosaics and sculpture she fades, but in the dark corners of taverns, in whispered jokes and cautionary tales, her name lingers. Mothers warn their sons, beware the Messalinas. Emperors vet their brides against her legend. And playwrights centuries later resurrect her as a trope, a device, a femme fatale. She is invoked in whispers like a Roman Eve offering not apples but empire. There's a deeper cruelty here. The woman who dared to live on her terms is only remembered by the terms of those who killed her. Some argue this distortion of her image is not unique. History is a tapestry woven by the victors, and women, especially powerful ones, are stitched in only if convenient. Think Cleopatra. Think Anne Boleyn. Think Catherine Howard. In the minds of male historians, their ambition became seduction. Their survival became promiscuity. Their downfall became proof of unfitness. Messalina simply fit too well into that pattern. But peel back the exaggerations, and you see something more terrifying: a woman who understood Rome, who knew how to play its games even when the rules shifted under her feet. A woman who may have been flawed, vain, reckless, but also intelligent, calculating, and far from the caricature she became. If she was a monster, then Rome made her one. And perhaps that's what terrified them most. Not the scandal, not the sex, but the power of a woman who refused to die quietly. In the centuries that follow, Messalina is no longer merely remembered, she is reinvented. She becomes the dark muse of painters, poets, and propagandists. In the flickering candlelight of Renaissance salons, her name is whispered alongside Lucretia and Jezebel, not for virtue or tragedy, but for temptation and sin. Artists render her not as a ruler, but a reclining nude, draped in silks, gazing seductively at the viewer. Rome's empress is reduced to a body, a warning, a fantasy, a lie. Shakespeare never names her, but her shadow hovers over every dangerous woman he pens. In the 17th century, she appears in opera as the villainess who dooms great men. In Victorian England, her name resurfaces in scandal sheets to describe adulterous wives and actresses. She is dragged from the palaces of Rome into the bedrooms of Europe. In France, her name becomes shorthand for licentiousness. In Italy, she's blamed for weakening the empire from within. In Germany, she's studied with a mix of fascination and revulsion. Across languages and borders, Messalina becomes a slur, a name no mother gives her daughter. All the while, the real woman, Valeria Messalina, slips further from reach. What did she believe? What did she want? Was she ever given the chance to grow, or was she born into a trap from the start? Married at 14, Empress by 15. A mother, a manipulator, a prisoner of marble hallways and whispered schemes. Some modern historians now attempt a resurrection not of her crimes, but of her humanity. They search beyond the satirists into the dry scrolls of senatorial proceedings, into inscriptions, property records, mentions in coins and statues. What emerges is still blurry but messier, more real. Here is a woman who built alliances with freedmen, who protected her children in a court that devoured heirs, who may have plotted, but also may have simply existed in a system that devoured women like her. It is not innocence they find, but intention, and in that a different kind of power, because Messalina, unlike the idealized Livia or the tragic Julia, was never passive. She did not fade quietly or live nobly in the margins. She took, demanded, provoked. Whether for her son's survival, her own hunger, or both, she acted, and Rome never forgave her for that. Even now her name provokes discomfort. Search her online, and the words slut, whore, nymphomaniac still dominate the headlines. No other empress of Rome is remembered so viscerally, no other woman perhaps so feared. Why? Because her story reminds us that history doesn't just record power, it decides who gets punished for having it. Messalina's downfall may have been political, but her legend was personal. She was not the only empress to wield influence, not the first to betray, not the last to fall. But she is remembered not as a woman who lived, but as a sin personified. And yet she endures, not in praise, not even in pity, but as a symbol, twisted, seductive, warning, and defiant, not just of a fallen empress, but of every woman history chose to silence by turning into a myth. The marble statues of Rome have long outlived their subjects. Faces carved in stillness locked into a kind of eternal dignity. But Messalina's image was never granted that peace. Her statues were smashed. Her name was scratched from records, her likeness defaced or replaced. She was buried not beneath a tombstone, but beneath centuries of contempt. Her silence was not gentle, it was imposed. And yet, she never quite disappears. In shadows, in scandals, in whispers that refuse to die, Messalina lives on, not as a woman, but as a symbol too potent to erase. Like the echo of footsteps down a marble corridor, faint but unmistakable. Rome tried to make her a lesson. But in doing so, it immortalized her. She is used to shame wives, to frighten rulers, to warn of ambition cloaked in beauty. Her story was told not to remember her, but to control others. And still beneath that mountain of distortion, something human pulses. A girl of noble blood offered to an older man to cement dynasties. A teenager navigating a court full of daggers. A mother watching over her son with a lioness's instincts. A woman who may have schemed, or simply survived. There is no diary, no letters, no soliloquy to explain her motives. But perhaps that's the point. Her greatest scandal wasn't whom she loved. It was that she dared to want. Power, autonomy, presence. She carved her name into the politics of an empire even as it was carved out of its memory. And for that, her punishment was not just death. It was erasure. But now you remember her. Not the myth, not the caricature, but the haunting outline of a woman Rome tried to forget. The candle flickers. The hall falls still. But somewhere behind the ruined pillars and silent scrolls, her story waits, watching, listening, enduring. Not just a cautionary tale, but a ghost who will not be tamed.